Dad's office smelled of mahogany and success. Every corner of the room screamed achievement, thick leather-bound books lining the shelves, awards neatly arranged on the walls, and a large oak desk that seemed to anchor the room itself. As a kid, I spent countless hours in there, watching Dad work tirelessly, shaping our family's future with every decision he made. He always said, "Hard work is the foundation of everything, Lucas. Nothing worth having comes easy." I believed him. I carried that belief with me like a torch. My name is Lucas Donovan, and this is the story of how I built my father's company from the ground up, only to have it all come crashing down because of a betrayal I never saw coming. It started on a cold December morning, the kind of day where the frost clings to every surface and the air cuts like shards of glass. I was standing in the boardroom, presenting the annual growth report to our investors. It was a good year. No, a phenomenal one. We had crossed the $100 million valuation mark, a milestone Dad would have been proud of if he were still alive to see it. I glanced around the room, catching the approving nods and murmurs of satisfaction. It felt like I was finally doing it, living up to his legacy. My mother, Catherine, and my younger sister, Vivian, sat at the back of the room. Mom looked proud, her soft smile lighting up her face. Vivian, on the other hand, was glued to her phone, probably texting one of her friends about some frivolous shopping spree. Vivian and I couldn't have been more different. While I spent the last 15 years pouring every ounce of my energy into the company, Vivian had taken a different route. She was the quintessential socialite, always attending parties, jet-setting around the world, and living off the family's wealth without contributing a single dime. It irked me, but I tried not to let it show. After all, family is family, or so I thought. The day ended with a celebration at my home. I had invited the key members of the team and a few close friends. Vivian waltzed in late, as usual, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. She greeted everyone with her signature charm, her laughter echoing through the house. "Lucas, darling," she said, draping an arm around my shoulder. "You've done an amazing job with the company. Dad would be so proud." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that for once, she saw the effort and sacrifice behind the success. But there was something in her tone, something almost mocking, that made my skin crawl. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I found myself standing by the fireplace, staring at the flames as they danced and flickered. Mom approached me, her soft hand resting on my arm. "Lucas," she began, her voice hesitant, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." "What is it, Mom?" I asked, turning to face her. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. "It's about the company. And your father's will." A chill ran down my spine. "What about it?" She hesitated, wringing her hands nervously. "Your father's will. It left everything to Vivian." For a moment I thought I had misheard her. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Lucas, please understand," she said quickly. "It wasn't my decision. Your father believed that you were strong enough to build your own legacy. He thought Vivian needed the financial support more than you did." My mind was reeling. The room seemed to tilt, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. "You're telling me that everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, is going to Vivian? The same Vivian who can't even balance her own checkbook? Lucas, it's not about capability. It's about family. Your father—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't use Dad as an excuse for this. He wouldn't have wanted this. He wouldn't have wanted me to be used as some kind of stepping stone while Vivian sits back and reaps the rewards. Mom sighed, her eyes filled with sadness. I wish I could change things, Lucas, but the will is legally binding. I stormed out of the room, my chest heaving with anger. The next few days were a blur. I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the growing resentment bubbling inside me. But then, something happened that shattered any illusions I had about Vivian. It was a week before her wedding, a grand affair that she had been planning for months. I was reviewing some financial reports when an email popped into my inbox. It was from one of our senior accountants. The subject line read, "Urgent, discrepancies in company funds." I opened the email, my heart sinking with every word. Someone had been siphoning money from the company's accounts, millions of dollars, funneled into private accounts linked to Vivian. I felt a cold rage settle over me as I stared at the evidence. My sister, the same sister who was about to inherit everything, had been stealing from the company I had built with my own hands. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about money, this was war. I couldn't sleep that night. The numbers from the email haunted me, swirling in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. $3.4 million. That was the total amount Vivian had siphoned from the company's accounts over the past 2 years. I stared at the spreadsheets, each transaction like a dagger to the chest. It wasn't just about the money, it was the betrayal that burned the most. I sat in my office, the glow from my laptop casting shadows on the walls. My hands clenched the edge of the desk as I tried to piece together how this could have happened. How could Vivian, my own sister, steal from the company I had built from scratch? And why? She had everything handed to her: luxury, privilege, a life most people could only dream of. At 3 a.m., I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted but no closer to an answer. I decided to confront her the next morning. The next day, the sun shone mockingly through the windows, as if the world were oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I waited until Vivian was alone in the dining room, sipping her morning latte as if she hadn't a care in the world. "Vivian," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, startled. "Lucas, you scared me. What's wrong?" I pulled out the printed spreadsheets and slammed them on the table in front of her. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes flickered to the papers, and for a brief second, I saw it. A flash of panic. But she quickly masked it with a casual shrug. "What is this? Some kind of financial report? You know I don't understand this stuff." "Don't play dumb with me, Vivian," I snapped. "These are records of the money you've been stealing from the company. $3.4 million, to be exact." Her face paled, but she maintained her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Stop lying," my voice rose, echoing through the room. "I have the proof. The accounts are linked to your name, your address. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "Lower your voice, Lucas. Do you want to wake up Mom and embarrass me?" "Embarrass you?" I laughed bitterly. "You've been stealing from the company, Vivian. You should be ashamed of yourself. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to get us here?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a side of Vivian I had never seen before. A cold, calculating look that sent chills down my spine. "You've worked hard? Oh, please, Lucas. You act like you're some kind of martyr. Newsflash. Dad built that company, not you. You just happened to be there when he died. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. How dare you? I hissed. I poured my life into that company after Dad passed. While you were out partying and living off the family fortune, I was in the trenches, making sure we didn't lose everything he built. She rolled her eyes. Oh, spare me the sob story. You've always thought you were better than me, haven't you? Just because you work a 9 to 5 and wear a suit, you think you're the golden child. Well, guess what? Dad's will says otherwise. And there it was, the bombshell I had been dreading. She knew about the will. How long have you known? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Long enough, she said smugly. And honestly, it's about time I got what I deserved. You've had your moment in the sun, Lucas. It's my turn now. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. Deserved? You think you deserve the company after everything you've done? You're a thief, Vivian, a liar. You don't deserve anything. She smirked, unfazed by my words. You can call me whatever you want, Lucas. But at the end of the day, the will is the law. And there's nothing you can do about it. Her arrogance was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. But instead, I turned and walked away, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. That evening, I sat in my office, staring at a picture of Dad on my desk. His smile was warm, his eyes full of pride. I could almost hear his voice. Lucas, there's no challenge you can't overcome. Just stay true to yourself. But how could I stay true to myself when my own family was tearing me apart? I decided to pay a visit to our lawyer, Mr. Hastings, the man who had handled Dad's estate. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. Mr. Hastings's office was exactly as I remembered it. Dimly lit, with walls lined with old legal books and the faint smell of leather and ink. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a kind smile. Lucas, it's good to see you, he said, motioning for me to sit. What brings you here today? I took a deep breath. It's about Dad's will. I need to know if there's any way to contest it. His expression grew serious. Contesting a will is no small matter, Lucas. It's a lengthy and often expensive process. What exactly are you hoping to achieve? I explained everything, the company, the stolen money, Vivian's betrayal. By the time I finished, Mr. Hastings was frowning deeply. This is a difficult situation, he said finally, but there might be a way. If you can prove that Vivian has been engaging in fraudulent activity, it could give us grounds to challenge the will. However, you'll need solid evidence. I nodded, determination hardening my resolve. I'll get the evidence, Mr. Hastings. Whatever it takes, I'll prove that she doesn't deserve a single penny of Dad's legacy. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred in my vision. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was stronger than ever. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for what was right. Vivian had declared war, and I was ready to fight. The days that followed were some of the most challenging of my life. Every step I took to uncover the truth felt like walking on shards of glass. Betrayal has a way of seeping into your soul, filling every corner of your mind with doubt and anger. But I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. If Vivian wanted a war, she'd get one. I started by going through every record, every email, and every financial document I could access. Vivian's trail was messy, but it was there, hidden withdrawals, offshore accounts, and lavish purchases that didn't align with her official income. It was astounding how bold she had been, almost as if she believed she was untouchable. By the end of the week, I had compiled a thick folder of evidence: bank statements, email correspondences, and even invoices for ridiculous expenses, like a $25,000 diamond bracelet and a private yacht rental for her pre-wedding party. But the most damning piece of evidence came from a source I hadn't anticipated: an old employee named Mark. Mark had been one of Dad's most trusted advisors, working for the company for over 2 decades before retiring 3 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since his retirement, but something told me he might have insights into Vivian's actions. I found him in his modest suburban home tending to his garden. His face lit up when he saw me. "Lucas, it's been ages. How are you, son?" "Could be better, Mark," I admitted. "I need your help." Over cups of coffee in his cozy kitchen, I laid everything out: Dad's will, the stolen money, and Vivian's betrayal. Mark listened intently, his brows furrowing as I spoke. "I had my suspicions," he said finally. "Vivian was never involved in the company, but she always seemed to have access to funds. I didn't want to believe she'd stoop so low." "Do you have any proof?" I asked eagerly. Mark hesitated, then stood and disappeared into another room. When he returned, he was holding a small stack of papers. "These are copies of internal reports from a few years ago. I noticed some discrepancies in the accounts and flagged them, but Vivian convinced your mother it was all a misunderstanding. After that, I was subtly pushed out of the loop." I didn't press further because I didn't want to cause a rift in the family. I took the papers, my hands trembling. They were exactly what I needed: a clear link between Vivian and the missing funds. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "This means everything to me." "Your father would be proud of you, Lucas," Mark said, patting my shoulder. "Don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours." Armed with this new evidence, I met with Mr. Hastings again. His eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. "This is substantial, Lucas," he said. "With this, we can build a solid case to contest the will. But you need to be prepared. This will get ugly." Ugly didn't begin to describe it. The first shot in the battle came from Vivian herself. It was the day of her final wedding rehearsal, an extravagant affair held at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. I had no intention of attending, but my mother begged me to come. "Please, Lucas," she said, "it's her big day. Can't we have one moment of peace as a family?" Reluctantly, I agreed, but peace was the last thing on Vivian's mind. As soon as I arrived, she cornered me near the entrance, her face a mask of barely concealed fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm. "Excuse me?" I said, shaking her off. "Don't play dumb, Lucas," she snapped. "I know you've been digging into my finances. Do you really think you can outsmart me?" "I don't need to outsmart you," I said coldly. "Your actions speak for themselves." Her eyes narrowed and she leaned in close. "You're making a mistake. Back off now or you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It's a warning," she said, flashing a predatory smile. "This wedding is the start of my new life, and I won't let you ruin it. You can play detective all you want, but in the end, the will is still in my favor. You'll lose, Lucas. You always do." Her words cut deep, but they only strengthened my resolve. That night, I made the decision to attend her wedding. not as a guest, but as a man on a mission. As I sat in my car, staring at the invitation on the passenger seat, my mind raced with possibilities. Should I confront her publicly? Should I reveal the truth to everyone during her perfect day? Or should I wait and let the legal battle play out? I thought of Dad and everything he had stood for: integrity, hard work, and justice. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. The wedding was 2 days away, and every second felt like a countdown to the inevitable explosion. Vivian had played her cards, but now it was my turn. The day of the wedding arrived, draped in grandeur and luxury. The venue, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and glittering chandeliers, looked like something out of a fairy tale. But beneath the surface, tension simmered like a volcano ready to erupt. I stood at the edge of the reception area, watching as guests milled about in their designer outfits, sipping champagne and chatting animatedly. The air was thick with anticipation, but all I could feel was the weight of the evidence in the leather briefcase by my side. Vivian was the picture of perfection, dressed in a custom-made gown that probably cost more than my car. She floated through the crowd, flashing her dazzling smile and basking in the attention. If anyone suspected the chaos brewing beneath the surface, they didn't show it. I had spent the previous night agonizing over how to proceed. Part of me wanted to blow the whole thing up, expose Vivian for the fraud she was in front of everyone she cared about. But another part of me, the part Dad had raised, knew I needed to handle this with precision. As the ceremony began, I took my seat near the back, hidden among distant relatives and acquaintances. The officiant began to speak, his voice a low hum against the backdrop of the serene garden. Vivian stood at the altar, her soon-to-be husband gazing at her with adoration. I felt a pang of guilt for him. He had no idea what he was getting into. The vows were exchanged, the rings slipped onto fingers, and the words, "I do," echoed through the air. The crowd erupted in applause, and I clapped along, my expression unreadable. As the newlyweds made their way down the aisle, Vivian's eyes locked with mine. For a brief second, her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. She knew I was here, and she knew I wasn't done. The reception was even more extravagant than the ceremony. Live music, gourmet food, and an open bar that kept the guests entertained and blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. I kept my distance, observing everything and everyone. At one point, my mother approached me, her face etched with worry. "Lucas," she said softly, "what's going on? You've been so distant lately." I sighed, torn between protecting her and telling her the truth. "Mom, there's a lot happening that you don't know about, but I promise I'm handling it." She frowned, her eyes searching mine. "Does this have to do with Vivian?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I can't explain right now. Just trust me. Okay?" She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As the evening wore on, I finally saw my opportunity. Vivian had stepped away from the crowd, her phone in hand, as she moved toward the edge of the garden. I followed her, my footsteps silent on the cobblestone path. "Enjoying the show?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet. She spun around, startled. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my tone firm. Her eyes narrowed. "I told you to back off. This is my wedding day. You have no right to be here." "Your wedding day doesn't erase what you've done," I shot back. "I have all the evidence I need to expose you, Vivian. Every penny you stole, every lie you told. It's all documented." Her face turned pale, but she quickly regained her composure. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said, stepping closer. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. I've already spoken to Mr. Hastings. The will can be contested, and when the truth comes out, you'll lose everything. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Lucas, please, she said, her voice trembling. Let's talk about this. We're family. Family? I scoffed. You don't get to play the family card now, Vivian. Not after what you've done. She looked around, as if searching for an escape. Fine, she said finally. What do you want? Money? Power? Just name it, and I'll make it happen. I want justice, I said coldly. I want Dad's legacy to be protected, and I want you to pay for what you've done. Her expression hardened, and she stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Always the golden child, always the hero. But you're not. You're just a bitter little man who can't stand the fact that I'm better than you. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. This isn't about me, Vivian. This is about the truth. And the truth always comes out. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, seething with rage. Later that night, as the guests began to leave and the music faded into the background, I approached Mr. Hastings, who had agreed to meet me at the reception. Do you have everything you need? He asked. I nodded, handing him the briefcase. It's all here, every transaction, every piece of evidence. I want to move forward as soon as possible. He gave me a reassuring smile. We'll take care of it, Lucas. You're doing the right thing. As I watched him leave, a sense of calm washed over me. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally in control. Vivian had underestimated me, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. The war had begun, and I was ready to fight. The morning after the wedding was eerily calm. It was the kind of silence that felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm. I spent the early hours reviewing my plan, going over every detail to make sure there were no loose ends. The stakes were too high for mistakes now. By noon, the storm broke. It started with a phone call from Vivian. I let it ring a few times before answering, savoring the brief moment of power. Lucas, she said sharply, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. What the hell do you think you're doing? Good morning to you too, Vivian, I replied coolly. Don't play games with me, she snapped. I know you've been talking to Mr. Hastings. You have no right to dig into my personal affairs. Your personal affairs? I echoed, feigning surprise. You mean Dad's company, Dad's money, and the legacy you tried to steal? That's hardly personal, Vivian. It belongs to the family. Or at least it did before you decided to help yourself. There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice dangerously low. You think you're so clever, don't you? She said. Do you really think anyone will believe you? You're nothing but a jealous little boy throwing a tantrum because he didn't get his way. Believe me or not, the evidence speaks for itself, I said firmly. And once it's presented in court, the truth will be undeniable. Her laugh was cold and sharp. Court? You think this will end in court? You have no idea what you're dealing with, Lucas. I have connections, resources. You'll never win. Maybe, I admitted up. But I'm willing to bet you don't want this to go public. How do you think your shiny new husband will react when he finds out his perfect bride is a thief? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. and I knew I had hit a nerve. "This isn't over," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said again, "but at least I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I fought for what's right." "Can you say the same?" I hung up before she could respond. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mr. Hastings moved quickly, filing a formal petition to contest the will and freezing the company's accounts pending investigation. The news spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before the family drama became public knowledge. At first, the media painted me as the villain, a bitter son trying to tear his family apart. Vivian, ever the manipulative actress, played the victim perfectly. She gave interviews, shedding crocodile tears as she spoke about how hard she had worked to honor Dad's legacy, and how devastated she was by my betrayal. But lies have a way of unraveling when faced with the truth. The turning point came during a meeting with the company's board of directors. Vivian had called the meeting, clearly hoping to rally support and paint me as the aggressor. I arrived early, armed with my evidence and a quiet determination. When she walked in, flanked by her lawyer and a few loyal sycophants, she gave me a smug smile that set my blood boiling. "Lucas," she said sweetly, "I'm surprised you showed up. I thought you'd be too embarrassed after all the trouble you've caused." "Embarrassed?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Not at all. In fact, I'm looking forward to clearing a few things up today." The meeting began, and Vivian wasted no time launching into her prepared speech. She painted herself as the savior of the company, the dutiful daughter who had stepped up in Dad's absence to ensure the business thrived. She accused me of being petty, irresponsible, and ungrateful. "I've done everything I can to protect this company," she said, her voice thick with feigned emotion. "And it breaks my heart to see Lucas trying to tear it down out of spite." When she finished, there was a smattering of polite applause from her supporters. She sat back, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. "Thank you, Vivian," I said, standing. "Now, if everyone would indulge me for a moment, I'd like to present a different perspective." I began by outlining the discrepancies in the financial records, walking the board through the trail of evidence I had uncovered. I showed them the hidden accounts, the unauthorized withdrawals, and the lavish purchases, all tied directly to Vivian. The room grew increasingly tense as I spoke, and by the time I finished, there was no denying the truth. Vivian tried to interrupt, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is absurd! These documents could have been fabricated. Lucas is just trying to destroy me." "Actually," I said calmly, "these documents were verified by an independent auditor. And if anyone doubts their authenticity, I'm more than happy to call them as a witness." Her face turned pale, and for the first time she seemed genuinely afraid. After the meeting, several board members approached me privately to express their support. They were appalled by Vivian's actions and promised to back me in court. But the most surprising moment came when my mother pulled me aside. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling, "I had no idea. I trusted Vivian. I thought she was doing what was best for the family." I placed a hand on her shoulder, my anger softening into something closer to pity. "I know, Mom. She's been manipulating all of us, but it's not your fault. Dad trusted her too, and she betrayed him just like she betrayed us." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded. "What can I do to help?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Stand with me. Tell the truth, even if it's hard. We owe it to Dad, and to ourselves to make this right. She agreed, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were truly on the same side. As the court date loomed closer, Vivian's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Her husband, furious over the revelations, reportedly moved out of their home. Her supporters grew scarce, and whispers of her deceit spread through social circles like wildfire. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The day of the court hearing arrived with a cold, somber air. As I stood outside the courthouse, clutching the file of evidence that had taken months to compile, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of nerves and determination. This was it, the culmination of everything I had fought for. My mother was by my side, her presence a silent but powerful testament to the truth. She hadn't spoken much in the days leading up to this moment, but her decision to stand with me had strengthened my resolve. Vivian arrived shortly after, her appearance a stark contrast to the confident, polished woman she had been at her wedding. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her face pale and drawn. She avoided eye contact as she hurried past the reporters clustered outside, her lawyer trailing behind her. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The judge, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes, called the session to order, and the proceedings began. Vivian's lawyer started with a desperate attempt to discredit me, painting me as a jealous, vengeful sibling out to tarnish my sister's reputation. Lucas has always felt overshadowed by Vivian, the lawyer argued, his voice smooth but unconvincing. This is nothing more than a baseless attack fueled by resentment. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn. When it finally came, I stood and faced the judge, my voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Your Honor, I began, this isn't about resentment or rivalry. It's about justice. My sister misused her position, deceived our family, and betrayed our late father's trust. The evidence speaks for itself. I laid out the financial records, transaction logs, and statements from the independent auditor. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Vivian's defense. The turning point came when I played a recording of a phone call between Vivian and one of her accomplices, a call I had managed to obtain with the help of a private investigator. In the recording, Vivian's voice was unmistakable as she discussed how to hide the money she had siphoned off from the company. The courtroom fell silent as the recording played, her words echoing in the stunned stillness. Vivian's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled him. This is damning evidence, Ms. Grant, the judge said, his tone severe. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Vivian stood, her face a mask of panic and defiance. This is all a setup, she cried. Lucas has always hated me. He'll do anything to ruin my life. But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in the room knew it. After hours of deliberation, the judge finally delivered his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Ms. Vivian Grant engaged in fraudulent activities and misappropriation of funds. The contested will is declared invalid, and the rightful ownership of the company and assets will be determined in accordance with the law. The gavel struck, and it was over. Vivian slumped in her seat, her face pale and her hands trembling. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. For me, it wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us, their cameras flashing and their microphones thrust forward. My mother and I made a brief statement, thanking the legal team and emphasizing the importance of preserving my father's legacy. As we walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was over, and justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the trial was swift and brutal. Vivian's reputation was in shambles, and her husband filed for an annulment, citing fraud and deceit. The social circles she had once ruled turned their backs on her, and she retreated into obscurity. As for the company, I worked tirelessly to rebuild it, ensuring that my father's vision was honored. My mother and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we had faced together. One evening, as I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, I found myself thinking about my father. "I hope I made you proud, Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The journey had been long and painful, but I had fought for what was right. And in the end, that was what truly mattered.